Hidely ho there. It's me. All right. Let's see. What's this? Ah, okay. You see here. I'm live now. And I'm going to start sharing this. I'll tweet that out. I'm still learning this new format for live streaming, so bear with me as I go through this. Those of you who end up watching this later. And all right, post. And yeah. All right. So no viewers yet, but we'll see how this goes. Finally, share it over to Facebook. Yes. Let's go ahead and put it in. Share it in my own timeline. Okay. I will be better prepared next time now that I know this is an option, but I didn't know that it was. So there is that. Anyway, so hi, how's everybody? I am starting this stream to talk about the Heroes Handbook, which shows up as backwards on here, but whatever. So the Heroes Handbook for Midgard. I backed the Kickstarter for Midgard, and happy that I did. Got lots of product. It was well worth the money I put into it. And I don't know. I thought it was worth talking about at least the Heroes Handbook. And also, I'm going to experiment with this YouTube live streaming. See how it goes. Anyway, so the Heroes Handbook. This is an interesting book. This is the player's options book. They have a world book, which is sort of here's the setting in whole. It's more GM oriented than the player oriented in that regard. And it's a nice book as well. I haven't finished reading either of these, actually. I've skimmed through. I've done an initial pass, let's say, of this one. And I'm just beginning the initial pass on the world book. There's a lot of reading to go through. I'm just going to put that out there. There's a lot to go through in both books. Now, the Heroes Handbook is designed for making PCs in the Midgard setting, and it includes options that are integral to the Midgard setting. Now, what does that mean? I'm going to go ahead and change the direction on this. All right, what does that mean? So the Midgard setting is sort of a sword and sorcery style setting, a la Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, if you will, complete with a really interesting city called Zobek. It's got a few differences. It is, among other things, it has some steampunk elements, which are markedly different than most sword and sorcery. And it's got a few, odds and ends that make it just a little bit different. The world itself of Midgard is a flat plane. It is actually not a round world. Most of the other D&D style settings, fantasy worlds, are in fact round worlds, just like Earth, but they're peasants may not know the full extent of the world or what other worlds are like, but this particular setting is in fact flat, kind of like Discworld as an option. It has dragon empires and vaguely Egyptian empires to the south. It's got a very much a Norse feel in some of the central parts and northern parts of the settings. A lot of the gods are taken from Norse mythology. So it's got that going on. It's an interesting setting and it's worth checking out. And these are out in PDF form on Drive-Thru RPG. So if you finish listening to this and think, hey, I want to go do that, you should go do that. So what do I think of this? Well, like I said, I like the setting. This book has a really staggering amount of stuff in it for you to play a player character, which is neat. There's a lot of good art in here. There's lots of good content. Is everything in here going to be good for your game? Well, first, if you're not running a Midgard game, some of these may or may not be of interest to you. And the some of the stuff in here, some people are just not going to go for various reasons. Some of them are just not as exciting as others. So you have a bunch of racial options, ranging from, sort of this world's version of elves, this world's versions of dwarves, and so on, to some new things like Dampier, which are humans and people born from the union of a vampire and a human. There's a Bratkin. There's Raven people. There are Gear Forged. Gear Forged I particularly like, mainly because I'm a big fan of the old Eberron setting, and Gear Forged are pretty much ideal for dropping into Warforged. I mean, just change the name and a couple of the background details, and it's a Warforged. Call it a day. There are some races that are, I don't know, weirder, harder to work out. The one that sticks out is the sort of Centaur race, which they are a large-sized creature that is, and several effects are limited to medium-sized creatures, so that can be problematic. They do get around some of it by making it so that the only equipment you can use is sized for medium. So there is some leeway here. I personally would have issues with playing a Centaur just because a lot of D&D games involve you going underground into dungeons and various sort of indoor places where the Centaur is less advantageous than it is, if you're playing in the plains and doing a lot of wilderness adventures, they're great. Indoor battles and indoor, going through dungeons and trap rooms and such, they might be less helpful. So there is that. Let's see what else. So they also have some class options. They have rather a lot of class options for fighters, rogues, rangers. Pretty much every class gets a little bit of love in here. And some of them are quite interesting. Some of them are less so. Like there's a Shieldbearer. a Shieldbearer fighter type, which is, it wasn't as exciting as some of the other class options. For instance, like Shieldbearer. Third level, you get to take an attack action that makes an improvised weapon attack with your shield as a bonus action. Okay. That's not exciting. Some of the later stuff is a little more exciting, and some improved fighting style stuff with the shield, and that's pretty neat. Whereas Sword Dancer sounds just much more, exciting. It's evocative. The name of it is evocative. And as a result, I think that that certainly makes it a more interesting thing to grab. You've got some things in here like the Griffin Knight. If you can't get awesome out of a knight that rides a griffin, you're not really trying. On the other hand, that does seem a little too powerful for a third level character to have a griffin mount. But to each their own, right? There's some different ones in here, and some of them are much more evocative than others, much more interesting. And some of them are just kind of weird. The clanking mercenary martial art type is basically, I use tinkering, kind of. They can, enhance armor and weapons, and they're, much more tinkering oriented. They've got some new paladins that are all right. Paladin Radiance, Oath of Thunder. Actually, Oath of Thunder sounds much more, when you start reading the powers, it's Storm Strike and things like that. That makes Aura of Alacrity. Those sound much more compelling and interesting than the name would suggest. There's some new Rangers, Vampire Slayer, Zobek Scout archetype, Rogue Duelist archetype, and a duelist. Do you need a duelist? There is a Swashbuckler out there, so do you need a duelist? That said, the duelist build is maybe more interesting than the Swashbuckler build. You get the Fixer archetype. The Fixer is basically the person who knows a guy and knows how to find a guy who can do the thing that you're looking to do. It's interesting. There is some weapons options that I don't know. I'm not certain how I feel about the weapons options. I think if I were to allow them in my game, I would want them to be tweaked a little. What they do is they give you extra options that you can do with the weapons if you're proficient in them. Let me grab a random sample. So, for example, if you have the scimitar and you are proficient in the scimitar, you can use one of these abilities as long as you are wielding the appropriate weapon and proficient with it. So these are maneuvers, kind of like what the fighter, the Battlemaster fighter does. So, but like a bloody wound. When you hit a creature with a scimitar, you can choose to make a superficial but bloody wound attack, deals no damage, but the target takes in the D6 slashing damage at the beginning of each of its turns until it makes a DC 10 Wisdom medicine check as an action. And another one is short draw. As an attack, you may draw a sheathed one-handed sword and make an attack roll to strike the enemy with its pommel, leaving the target gasping for breath. Da, 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 da. Attack deals no damage, but the next attack roll made against the target has advantage. You must have at least one hand free to take this action. So these are maneuvers that you can pull with the weapon. And these are powerful and interesting, but it does sort of bite into the Battlemaster's shtick. So I do find myself wondering if I might not require at least a feat to do this, or possibly make it a subset of the Battlemaster. You know, the Battlemaster can unlock these or something, because these are, you know, they certainly bite into that realm. They're cool, though. I like the powers that they describe, because it makes a difference in what you're using, right? You know, there is something different about using a quarterstaff than from using a mace. And in this sort of further hammers this home. I think the quarterstaff ability is called Vault. You can use it to leap further. So basically you're running and pole vaulting off of your quarterstaff. That's neat. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting option, but it certainly would take me some time to think about how I would want to implement it. As it is implemented here, I suppose it's okay, but it definitely takes away from the cool exclusivity of the Battlemaster. So there is that. They also introduced some new weapons, which are pretty cool. I mean, they're standard, you know, here this faction has this kind of great axe, or this weapon is found in the Egyptian culture, the Southlands. And, you know, they each have their own little special thing. As an example, let's go with the Nurian hook. A Nurian hook is a 1 foot long square shaft that ends in a bronze hook with an arrow-shaped point at the pommel, and bombers and butchers use it to hang up corpses. So that's charming. It's like a little crescent knife at one end and a sharp point at the other, and it can do things like help you trip or disarm somebody as a parry action. So it's neat. They tend to separate some of the character options based off, or class options based off of grouping. So there's the sort of martial group, there's the divine group, which really is just clerics, I think. They list some new gods. They have several new domains, some of which are cool and some of which I'm like, like, do we need a cat domain? That said, the cat domain gives you some cool stuff. The Clockwork domain, now that's much more interesting, especially when you have a race of Clockwork people. Dragon domain, hunger domain, hunting domain. You know, so some of these are more interesting than others. The labyrinth domain, you worship puzzles, I guess. They also, they've got several options there. They also have the circles of stone, which are used by druids. You've got pantheist priests, which basically change their divine, their channel divinity often, I guess, to cycle through the different gods in a particular pantheon. They also have rune magic. Rune spells are a whole subset of magic that we'll get into in a bit. They've got some arcane stuff for sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards. The sorcerer's bloodline, being of the Mazeborn, is oddly specific, I guess. The shadow domain is, you know, my power is dark and spooky, but it's actually some cool stuff. Your fire burns with deeply purple flame that sheds little light and casts inky shadows. That's pretty cool. It's got a lot of style to it, a lot of fancy. The warlock had one or two options that really did actually grab my interest. The genie as a pact, the being bound to a genie as your patron actually is pretty cool. I like that one. I like the style of that. Genies are really interesting in fantasy, and I like them getting used here. Again, tying into the Clockwork thing with the Gear Forged and the sort of steampunk thing, there is the Great Machine Pact, which, yeah, so you're basically tied to some giant mystical machine, like Mechanicus kind of thing. God, and then they have others where it's like the Light Eater. Some of the powers in here are pretty nifty, but it doesn't call to me the way the genie one does. And to be fair, this is my personal read. Other people may feel differently. Wizard Arcane Tradition, Angelic Scribe. It's they do like warding seals and such, dealing with angels and what that, the different seals have different powers, and it's nifty. There's a Clockwork school for wizards, because of course there's a Clockwork everything in this. Do you like Clockwork? If you like Clockwork in your fantasy, definitely get this book, because there's lots of Clockwork options. Doom Croakers, Dragon Masks, Elementalist. The Elementalist seems like, why haven't we seen that already from D&D? I mean, that seems like an obvious option for a lot of people, and I'm not sure why we haven't seen that yet. And then there are masteries. And these are sort of things that you can do to different spells. Let me see if here. Masteries are specialized techniques you can use to augment your spell casting. Unless noted otherwise, you can only use one mastery in a given spell. The masteries are presented in order. Let's find one. Let's grab one. Let's grab a relatively low one. Elemental Command. As an action, you can charm an elemental creature for as long as you can maintain concentration, as if they're concentrating on the spell, for up to an hour. If you or your companions damage the charmed elemental or take harmful actions against it, charmed conditions end immediately. Once this ability ends for a given elemental, it is immune to being charmed by you for 24 hours. So this is stuff that sort of the nebulous stuff related to spellcasters. Like, you would think the wizard has this option. This is just sort of quantifying it. In this case, with elementalists, these are things that the elementalists can just do. And let's see. Elven High Magic is a wizard school. Sure, why not? There's some other options in here. There's some, let's see, Wizard School of Entropy, which is basically, do you want to be a chaotic wizard? Because this is all about chaotic magic. Kind of like the wild magic for sorcery, only it's a wizard. Geomancy, which actually is about working with ley lines. And so, yeah, there's a lot of options here. Then they get into the feats and backgrounds. And some of these are more interesting than others. Like I said, like Dragonsmith sounds evocative. You can make stuff from dragon body parts. that's pretty neat, I gotta admit. But the dragon magic item feats are all pretty interesting. You got elemental magic feats. You got ley line magic feats. You've got ring magic feats. Rune magic feats. So you have a bunch of feats tied to different sort of setting specific magical items, or not items, but things that are part of the culture, the setting of it, the kind of the metaphysics of this world. We've got a bunch of backgrounds that are, much more defined than just general criminal or spy. You've got scholars from a particular city, or Amazon warriors from a particular place. Let's grab one just at random. How about the Blood Sisters? Brought up to believe the service of the Red Goddess Marina in one of her temples, likely from a young age. As a member of the Blood Sisters, you are accorded respect and often fear on account of your status if your temple was located within the principalities. Beyond Maragau's borders, however, the goddess worship would have been forbidden, and you would have honored her in secret. So it's like members of a secret cult, or members of the cult of this goddess. They're the Dancing Bear Guide, Champions of Margau. So these are all backgrounds that are much more tied to the realm itself. And I think anytime you release a setting thing, you're probably going to want to do a bunch of backgrounds that are much more tied. So yeah, there's that. Let's see here. All right. And then they start digging into like the rune magic and the ring magic. Ring magic is all about building circles and linking circles and materials. Whereas rune magic is you have a particular symbol that you can use. And both of these are unlocked using the different feats that you take to get them. So they're interesting there. And they deserve a deep dive. I have not given them a deep dive yet. I've just skimmed it. And they have some rituals tied to like the rune magic and what have you. There's also a bunch of new spells, which is not surprising given that everything else that they've done. Having spells seems ideal. It seems like something that of course you would. And then towards the end, you've got some creatures and magic items and other random bits that they sort of tossed into the back. So this is the Midgard Heroes Handbook. I'm fond of it. I think it's got a lot of cool stuff. It's got some stuff that I admit that I would have trouble using in some games that I've run. And some things that I think won't excite everybody. But it's got enough random variety that I think everybody will find something in there that catches their interest. Is it more useful to you in the Midgard setting? Yes, I think that's safe to say. But a lot of the stuff could be easily mined and tossed into something else. Like, I could totally use the Gear Forged for a Eberron campaign. Absolutely. Easy. Some of the races would fit in nicely in a number of settings. If you're running a Tal Ray setting or Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or what have you, a lot of these races and classes would fit in fine. The ones that are deeply flavored to the setting itself, you might have to do some tweaking here and there, but overall, I think it works. Anyways, I've been rambling for half an hour. I think I had one person stop by. So the live streaming is hit or miss, I guess. I need to, schedule one earlier in the evening. But tomorrow I've got a game, and a birthday party before that for my nieces. So yeah, it's going to be a day. But yeah, I'll definitely do this again. If you look at this later, if you see an archived version of this, tell me what you think. Should I do more of these? They're certainly easier than some of my other recordings, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm going to wrap things up. Subscribe to the channel, like if you like it. Go to my Patreon. My Patreon is patreon.com/Jeremiah McCoy. I also have a blog, so feel free to go to the blog, jeremiahmccoy.com. And hopefully I will be putting up more content and you will see more of me. And I will talk to you later. Have a good one, kids.